Hey everyone, Shane from Otherworld Games here. I'm here to give you all a walkthrough of my debut game, Nine Muses. I'm so excited to get this out and into your hands, but I want to make sure it's the right game for you, so let's check it out. Okay, here's how to set up a game of Nine Muses. So first, dump all the knowledge out so that everyone has access to it. Then take the Aristotle card and place that out. Then take all the philosopher cards, muse cards, score cards, and reference cards and separate them into their own decks. You want to shuffle the philosopher cards and the muse cards. Shuffle, shuffle. You want to give one reference card and a pair of scorekeeping cards to each player. In this game we have 2 players, so here you go, opponent. Then you can put the rest of those back in the box. And then you'll want to give every player 2 craft. I'm going to move this Aristotle card around. Give every player 3 philosopher cards. Oh, and actually this is a 2-player game, so we actually only start out with a certain number. And then move this around so we can see it. You will want to draw 5 muses and put them in a row, just so it's easy for everyone to see. And that's it. 2 craft per player, 1 reference card, 2 score cards, 3 philosopher cards, and then you put the 9 muses out and keep Aristotle out. Nine Muses is played over 5 rounds. The drawing of a new muse to put out into this center area marks the start of a new round. But during the round, players will take turns using a philosopher card for one of various actions. So the reference card actually goes through this, but you have 4 actions you can take on your turn. They all involve discarding the philosopher card in your hand. And so that means that each player has 3 turns per round. Because at the beginning of the round, you will always draw 3 philosopher cards. So, on my turn, I can use a philosopher card to perform the knowledge exchange. So like Hipparchia here allows me to gain 1 ethics or trade 1 ethics in for 2 craft and 2 science. We have Hypatia or Hypatia, depending on your pronunciation, allows you to trade 1 science in for 2 craft or 2 craft in for 3 science. And since we just started this game, and it's my turn, I have 2 craft. I feel like the knowledge exchange with Hypatia is the best way to go. And so with the knowledge exchange, you're picking one of these 2 options. You can't do both. So I'm going to pick the bottom option. I'm going to discard Hypatia. And in Nine Muses, you always trade with the central bank first. So trading my 2 knowledge for 3 knowledge. 2 craft for 3 science. It's a pretty good deal. I'll show you my opponent's cards. So on my opponent's turn, they could turn around and do the same thing if they wanted to, or they could take advantage of the fact that they now have the most craft and they can call a muse. The way calling a muse works is on your turn, you will still discard the philosopher card. So in this case, my opponent might want to discard, let's say they discard Heron here in order to invoke this action. And then they must meet the condition in the box in order to call a muse. My opponent meets the condition because they're the only player with the most craft. Since I traded my craft in for science, I inadvertently gave them an opportunity to call this muse. So they discard the philosopher card and they pull the muse over to their side. Now, at the beginning of their next turn, they can use the muse's power. This is Terpsichore, or Terpsichore, sorry. This is Terpsichore. Muses of Dance, and you gain an extra victory point per craft you demonstrate to Aristotle, which is another action you can take on your turn. On your turn, you can only take one action at a time, though. So that was my opponent's turn. Now it's my turn again. I can either perform the knowledge exchange that Hipparchia has here, or Aesop's knowledge exchange, and gain 2 craft. Or I can call a muse myself. And since I have the most science, my opponent has 2 craft, I have 3 science. I think that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to discard Aesop here, and I'm going to collect Urania and recruit her over to my side. And so this is how turns look in a game of 9 muses. You're discarding a philosopher card to do one of 4 different actions. Some of the other actions we're going to get to here are demonstrating to Aristotle. This is a great way to score massive victory points or toil. This is really something to do if you have no other options left, but you discard your philosopher card to gain 1 craft. That's sort of your last resort. So it's the start of my opponent's next turn. Here are the 2 philosopher cards my opponent has. So they are going to discard Hipparchia here in order to gain an ethics for now. So it's my turn, and I just noticed errato here. And I currently have the least amount of craft since my opponent grabbed a craft. So I'm going to discard Hipparchia here, and I'm going to take errato. I'm out of cards. My opponent has 1 turn left. They have Hypatia. I think my opponent, since this is the first round here, is going to want to try to gain whatever they can. So they're going to discard Hypatia to use Hypatia's knowledge exchange. And that's to turn in 2 craft for 3 science. And that's the end of the round. My opponent and I are out of philosopher cards. To start a new round, you draw 1 new muse. So you'll notice that muses don't replenish during the round, they only replenish at the beginning of the new round, right? Because the muses are also sort of the ticking clock for the game. After the last muse has been drawn, everyone will play 1 final round, and then everyone will tally their points to determine a winner. We just went through the first round. Neither of us have scored any points during this round, but we're setting ourselves up to be able to score massive points in the future. And that's one thing to think about as you play 9 muses. I've seen a wide array of strategies from the playtesters of this game. Some people just hoard as much as possible, and then they turn a bunch of knowledge in for victory points, and they try to use muses to maximize that. For example, Urania alone, if I'm able to turn in these 3 science, Urania lets me score 2 extra victory points. My opponent's muse, Terpsichore, sorry, I keep saying that wrong. Terpsichore can score an extra victory point per craft here, which is the hammer. So they're probably wanting to build up a bunch of craft and score, which is actually pretty easy to do in this game. I'm wanting to build up a bunch of science and score, which is a little harder, but it's a higher risk, higher reward. So as you get into the weeds of a game of 9 muses, you'll notice that your bank's resources are finite. This is on purpose because whenever a specific type of knowledge is not in the bank, you steal it from your opponent. For example, it's my turn right now, and maybe I want to play Heron in order to turn in 1 science for 3 craft. There's only 1 ethics in the bank right now. My opponent has a lot of craft, and so I'm going to discard Heron, and you still only exchange with the bank, so I'm not giving my opponent the science. I put the science in the bank, but the bank has no craft, so I'm going to take 3 craft from my opponent. Hee hee, haha, take that. So one of the other things that you can do on your turn is demonstrate to Aristotle. Let me show you what the Aristotle card looks like. This card lets you trade in any number of 1 type of knowledge for the corresponding victory points on the card. So you select 1 type of knowledge, and then you trade as much of that as you want in. Sometimes it's advantageous for you to just trade all of your knowledge in and put that back. It goes back to the bank, you get a bunch of victory points, and everything's good. Other times, though, you might reconsider because that leaves you vulnerable for your muses to get stolen. But right now, it's my turn. I want to trade in all of my science. I have 2 science. I want to trade that in for victory points. Normally, I would get 4 victory points, right? 2 science. Each science is worth 2 victory points. However, I also have Urania on my side, right here. Urania is a multiplier. So Urania allows me to score 2 extra victory points per science I demonstrate to Aristotle. So that means instead of scoring 4 victory points, I turn my science into the bank and I score 8 victory points. And the way that I represent that is on my scorecard, or pair of scorecards. So say I had 25 victory points. 25 plus 8 is 33. So I would take this, turn it sideways, and move it down so that I can track my score. 33 victory points for me. One of the things I mentioned earlier was the ability to steal a muse. You can steal an opponent's muse as long as you meet the condition and they no longer do. So you have to be the only one to meet the condition in the box to call any muse. However, if your opponent no longer meets the condition in the box and you do, you can take their muse. For example, I have a bunch of craft. That's the only resource I have because I just turned my science in for some victory points by demonstrating to Aristotle. It's my opponent's turn, and they've been eyeballing Urania for quite some time. So on their turn, they're going to discard a philosopher card. They're going to discard agnotasy right here. So discard agnotasy. When you call a muse, you can take a muse from the central area or any one of your opponent's muses, as long as you're the only one to meet the criteria in the box. So right now, my opponent has 3 science, I have no science, meaning my opponent is the only one who meets the condition to take Urania. My opponent also is the only one who meets the condition to take Cleo, which adds a huge modifier to turning in ethics. My opponent has the most ethics right now, and they think it's a good idea to be able to steal Cleo. So there they go. They take Cleo from me, and I am sad. Now, this might not help them out on their current turn, because you can only take 1 action on your turn, so you can't take Cleo and then immediately try to score. But on their next turn, if they're able to maintain Cleo, then they'll be able to turn in their ethics for 8 victory points alone. So keep in mind those sort of trade-offs when you play the game, like which action is best for you at the time. It's good to steal a muse, but you specifically want to make sure that you're likely to maintain the muse, because when it's my turn, I might want to just steal Cleo right back. Except I can't, because I don't have the ethics for it. So I either need to acquire some ethics in order to chase down Cleo, or I just need to say, you know what, I can't get Cleo, let me try a different strategy. I think I'm going to continue with my strategy to use Urania's ability to my advantage, and right now I have a lot of craft. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to get some science out of that, and I'm going to use Archimedes here for his knowledge exchange. So I talked earlier about how you can only pick one of these. I also want to mention that you can only do the exchange once, so I can't just churn in all of my craft for a bunch of science. But I'm still going to pick this. I'm going to turn one craft in for 2 science. 1 craft, 2 science. Oh, that was an ethics. Oops, 2 science. There we go. Okay, so this is the final round of the game. We know it's the final round because the final muse is being drawn. It's Calliope. Okay, so we went through the last round. My opponent was able to turn in all of their resources except the 2 craft that they didn't really spend for the entire game. And I was able to turn in everything for victory points. And now we're going to tally the score. Whenever the final round is over, we tally our scores. Whoever has the most victory points is the greatest sage of all time. I have 65 points, and my opponent has 44, declaring me the winner and a great philosopher, and leaving my opponent in the footnotes of the history books. Go away. You are nothing to me, opponent. Nothing. Alright, well that was a walkthrough of 9 Muses. I hope you enjoyed it. It's going to be available for purchase on May 29th. Mark your calendars. You can buy the physical version for $35 US. That's the one that you just saw in the walkthrough. It's a high quality physical version. The cards have a UV coating on them. They're water resistant. There's a lot of awesome quality bells and whistles put into the physical version. That's going to be available at thegamecrafter.com for purchase on May 29th. Also on May 29th, the print and play version will be available on itch.io. That's itch.io. I will have a color version of the print and play as well as a grayscale low ink that won't include a lot of the extra gradients and stuff, so it's going to be friendly on your printer, and with suggestions for how to supplement the tokens for other assets you may have so that you don't have to print out and cut out a bunch of tokens. I really hope you like this walkthrough. I really hope you like this game, and I'll see you May 29th. Or Terpsichore, sorry. This is Terpsichore. Muses of Dance.